Hello and welcome everyone to Door County Reads 2022 Festival. I'm Jared Santek, Artistic Director at Right On Door County. We are a proud partner of Door County Reads and are very happy to have you join us this afternoon for our author keynote event with Michael Perry. I have a few housekeeping announcements before we begin the program. This program may touch on varying points of view. We thank you for being open to hearing others' opinions and participating in intellectual freedom in a respectful manner. Please remain muted throughout today's program. We may mute you if we notice background noise. Please use the chat feature to ask questions. While we can't promise that all of the questions will be answered during the program, we thank you for your participation. This event includes live transcription. Please click the CC or closed caption or live transcription symbol in the bottom toolbar, then click Show Subtitle. You'll not be able to have chat and closed captioning enabled at the same time. Zoom toggles back and forth between these two functions. You can follow us at #DoorCountyReads. I would now like to welcome Door County Library Director, Tina Kakoski, to talk a bit about this year's program. Tina.
Thank you, Jared. Good afternoon, and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for Door County Reads Festival 2022. I have had the great good luck and pleasure to be the Door County Library Director for almost 5 years. And one of the most wonderful things about being the director is getting to be a part of this right in the middle of winter annual countywide reading event during the supposedly quiet season. This is my 5th Door County Reads and the 15th anniversary of the event. I took a journey back to the beginnings of Door County Reads when researching the retrospective kickoff, which debuted last Sunday and can still be accessed online at doorcountyreads.org. I found that Door County Reads is not only a time when everyone reads a book and then goes to a book discussion. Multiple book discussions, of course, are the basis for Door County Reads, but there is so much more. Each year, creative people thought outside the box to bring presentations, demonstrations, panels, world culture, and the arts in all its forms to the people of Door County. And since having to be virtual, this event is also available to people around the world. What has remained constant over the last 15 years is the desire to read a common book or books and delve into many aspects of the book as a community. All of this would not be possible without our sponsors, partners, and presenters, and I encourage you to go to doorcountyreads.org and click on sponsors to see the extensive list of who we must thank for this event in 2022. And I beg your indulgence as I list our sponsors for this year. At the premier level, the Door County Library Foundation. At the platinum level, the Friends of Door County Libraries. At the bronze level, the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, Writing and Applied Arts, and English. And last but certainly not least, Right On Door County. So thanks to all of you for coming on this journey with us over the last years. And we hope you will continue the journey in the years to come. And now back to Jared and our special guest today.
Thank you, Tina. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our featured author, Michael Perry. Michael has the type of resume that would make any writer jealous, or anyone for that matter. According to the Wisconsin Literary Map, his past occupations include forklift and backhoe operator, answering a suicide hotline, physical therapy aide, country music roadie, and a roller skating Snoopy. So you know that there are a lot of stories to be had from those jobs. Michael is a singer-songwriter, the author of numerous books of nonfiction, including the 2 that we are focusing on during this festival, and books of fiction, including the young adult novel, The Scavengers. And thankfully, there are at least 3 upcoming releases to look forward to and more works on the way. In fact, we had hoped this week that Michael would be one of our writers in residence at Write On, where he could focus on his most recent writing project. But when we made the shift to virtual, as any good writer would do, Michael said, why would I lose 5 hours driving each way when I could use that time to write? You can find Michael's books at your local library or purchase them through your favorite independent bookstore, and we encourage you to do both of those. Raised on a small dairy farm in Wisconsin, Michael equates his writing career to cleaning calf pens. He said, you just keep shoveling and eventually you've got a pile so big, someone will notice. We hope for many more years of shoveling from Michael Perry. Please give him a warm welcome.
Hi, folks. A couple of things come to mind right away before I start. One is I did write that some time ago about you just keep shoveling and until somebody notices. What I didn't write is that you just can't stop shoveling either. So I'm still shoveling, and as it pertains to what Jared just mentioned about having a book, 3 books in the hopper right now. One thing that he's right, I did say once I realized that we were going to go virtual, it's about a 5-hour run both ways to get over to Door County. And I did decide I would be better off using that time to write. But what I would like to share, and I think Jared can back me up on this, I wrote him about that because I just want to take a moment and know what Jared does up there on the peninsula, and that I truly was looking forward to the time and sanctuary of working in the retreat. And I'm not just saying that, I've benefited from that already. A few years back, I decided that I was going to adapt Population 485 for the stage. And in fact, a group out on the peninsula there just did a reading of the play. I decided I was going to adapt it for the stage. I had a friend who was a musician. He brought it up about 10 years ago. He said, he kept saying, we should do that, a version of that on the stage. He went on to have quite a bit of success, and he would still encourage me that we should do that project. And then one day I realized there was no we about it. It was me that was going to have to do it. So I started writing the script for this play. I've never written a play, and I read a bunch of scripts, and I read Our Town, and I read a bunch of different small town books and a bunch of small town scripts. And then I just started trying to convert or adapt, I guess would be the proper word, Population 485, the book, to the stage. The problem was I'm a freelancer. I work, that's how I feed my kids, is writing and creating and performing. And I generally, people say, well, how do you choose which project to work on? And I always go back to my nursing and back to my EMT training, which is I just rely on triage, what absolutely has to be done today. And so the problem with that play was there was no one waiting for it. There was no deadline. There was no check. It was just this project that I wanted to do. And so I would peck away at it, and I never quite was making the progress I needed to. And so in order to make sure that, this is one of those now it can be told stories, in order to make sure that that script got written, I had my assistant at the time book several theaters around Wisconsin, and we booked the play that I hadn't written yet. And I had to put down deposits. And so I then had the inspiration that I needed, and I started really hammering away on that. But in particular, Jared kindly offered me the opportunity to work for 3 days up at on the Write On grounds, specifically spend some time in Norb Bly's coop out there. And I would get up every morning and I'd go to that little coop and I would have 2 granola bars and a thermos full of coffee. And I wasn't allowed, I don't remember the limit I set for myself, but I wasn't allowed to come out of there until I hit it. And 3 days straight, I just wrote and wrote and wrote and revised. And when I came out after those 3 days, I had pretty much 90% of what became the play that we then went on to take around the state for a couple of years. So I just want to give a nod to Jared and all he's doing up there, and to reinforce that, yeah, I wish I was sitting over there right now, but it's that driving that I thought I'd cut out. So we did, by the way, take Population 45 on the road for about 2 years, theaters all around Wisconsin. And what a pleasure that was. And I wanted to keep going, but it was a ton of work. And I truly, out of my own pocket, I hired actors, and we sold tickets, and I paid the actors, and I'm already off on a tangent, which is I've made a living off of going off on tangents. But sometimes when I talk about writing and surviving as a freelancer and all the things you have to do, some artists don't want to talk about it, but I'm pretty frank about having to pay the bills. And so when I started with the play and knew that I was going to be taking actors on the road, I formed a little LLC, and I made sure to fill out all the state paperwork, and made sure that they all had unemployment and all that kind of stuff. So we did it the right way, but it was a lot of work to do it the right way. And so after 2 years, it had been very fulfilling, very rewarding. I think one of my favorite things about putting on Population 45 is we went to all these little small towns, and it was either, small theaters or some gorgeous theaters like in Oshkosh or Stoughton, and then sometimes just tiny little hole in the wall places. But in the lobby before the play, there was a certain amount of audience that had firefighting jackets or EMT jackets on. And I know those folks because they're my neighbors. I grew up with them. I served in the fire department beside them. And a certain percentage of them hadn't been to a play, or maybe wouldn't have chosen to go to a play. And I always felt good knowing that something had been written for them. And because I'm really into this idea that as a farm kid who does not have an arts background, I just feel like I'm cheating and coming in through the side door all the time. And I love letting other people in that side door. So it was 2 years of very fulfilling experience, and managed to finish in the black, which is always good too. But then it was time to turn it over to other people. And so now every once in a while, someone produces it. We make the script available. There's even some music that goes with it that we make available. And it is one of my favorite things is to find out that someone else is going to use the script and worry about pulling off the production night after night. As far as the Door County Reads program that we're here to recognize, again, I run out of the right words. Gratitude obviously is chief among them. Just never planned any of this, and I grew up, again, I'm going to switch over to some different material for this talk just because it is remote, but also because I think a lot of you have probably heard me run my mouth before, so I don't want to tell all the same stories. But many of you know, I did not set out to do any of this. Raised on a small farm in northern Wisconsin, grew up milking cows and baling hay, logging. I trot those things out pretty quickly, but you probably should also talk to my dad and maybe a couple of my brothers, because I did do all those things, but they often had to track me down wherever I was hiding with a book in order to get me to do them. And then at the age of 16, started working on a ranch in Wyoming, and a regular working beef and hay ranch, rode Roundup, did branding, and worked on the hay crew. And that's how I put myself through college. And I actually have a nursing degree. I have a bachelor's degree in nursing. I got that from the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. And set out to be a nurse, had no intention. Here's the thing, I grew up reading voraciously as a kid. My mom taught me to read when I was 4 years old. In the book Coop, I talk a lot about how I was raised, the family in which I was raised, which was an unusual family, but a benevolently unusual family, an unusual setting, an unusual religious background. But my mom, she taught me to read when I was 4 years old with a phonics book she ordered from a Chicago newspaper. And I just read voraciously from that point forward. But something that I only realized in the last decade or so, it's one of those things that was right in front of me for years and I just never saw it. All those years of reading, all from the time I was 4 to through high school, when I was reading Louis L'Amour cowboy books and reading about World War II fighter pilots and just immersing myself in literature and books and high-tone books and low-tone books and whatever I could get my hands on, and then into college And you know, that entire time, as much as I loved books, it never even occurred to me that someone like me could write books. To me, authors were spelled with a capital A. They were from somewhere far away. They went to certain schools. So I still, to this day, and I'm happy about this, I just, like I said earlier, I always feel like I snuck in the side door. I had to give a speech one time at a giant book conference in LA. And a whole bunch of famous authors, we were all nominated for something, and they made each author get up and give a little impromptu talk in front of all these people. And several very famous authors stood up before me, and they were very eloquent. And I just stood up and I said, man, I feel like I got on the wrong bus, but it's a great bus. So when I get word that someone's doing something like Door County Reads and they're using my books, there are a couple of thoughts. Number one, thank you to the independent booksellers that are out there selling books. There's no tougher business and no more essential business in these times. A gigantic thank you to all the people, the volunteers who pull these things together, the amount of work that goes into this. It doesn't just happen. And I know that because we heard from some of those volunteers very early in the process. So a huge thank you to them. And then the next thing is I'm just blown away afresh, I'm happy to say, that a book that I sat down and started writing in the early 90s before I even knew I was writing books, an essay that I wrote in the mid 90s that turned into a pitch for a book, and ultimately a book that I was privileged to write, to be able to sit in the heart of the place where you were raised and to look at it with a writer's eye, but also with your heart, and try to capture that place in a snapshot. I do not tell the definitive story. You know, if you take the title literally, that is one of 485 visions of that place, and they're not all the same. But what a privilege it was to be able to take everything I'd learned about writing and turn my focus on a place I cared about so deeply. And to think that, you know, that book came out in 2002. And so here we are 20 years later, and folks are still, I hope, taking something from it. And I'm still as surprised as ever that it's out there. That book, I get asked all the time. I've written now, I mean, depending on how you count and what you count, I'm working on my 20th and 21st books right now. And so people always say, well, what's your favorite book? And the joke I make is it's like kids, you don't have a favorite. And if you do, you're not allowed to say so. So I don't have a favorite. Each book, there's not a single book, even those, you know, recently I've been putting out some collections of the Roughneck Grace columns that I write. But there's not a single book, even those collections that I don't feel isn't ready to be out. I work really hard, and if writing a weekly column, I still try to put some heart, some humor, and some art in there somewhere. And so I don't have a favorite because they each were their own story. The writing of each was its own adventure in life. But there's no question that Population 485, I simply wouldn't be here talking to you if it wasn't for that book. That book, everything followed that book. And it came at the right time. I wasn't, you know, a young person who thought I needed to be a writer or that I had a right to be heard or whatever. I was just a guy trying to pay the rent. I wrote a couple of essays. Someone saw them, came to me, said, could you turn these into a book? And I said, yes. But what I'm really grateful about is that I had been working really hard at writing for 8 years, almost a decade at that point, and I was ready. I had gone to the college and audited creative writing courses, even though it wasn't towards my degree. I had studied and read, and you know, it was like a musician practicing chords and running scales. I'm so glad I didn't catch that break 10 years earlier, because I wouldn't have been ready. I thought I was, but I wouldn't have been. So Population 485 everything came together for me very nicely there. It's never been a giant mega hit. It's never been on the New York Times list. But even now, it just continues to have a life of its own and find new readers. And honestly, I have a friend sitting in here in the room with me, you can't see, who helps me with correspondence and stuff. And a week doesn't go by that somebody doesn't send me a note saying, I just read your book, Population 485. So I'm blown away by that. Blown away in a very subdued Scandinavian sort of way, but I am blown away. And then the other book, Truck, obviously Truck, there are all of my books have been written so that you could read any one of them without reading the others and they would make sense. But there is no question that there are 4 books that I wrote that do follow some sequence and there are some through lines. And so that would be Population 485, then Truck, then Coop, then Visiting Tom. There are through lines in each of those. And Truck, you know, everything is unexpected. Population 485, 2 things in there. I was very clear that there's a 6-mile square patch of Wisconsin where I feel utterly at home. And I ended that book feeling utterly at home, utterly settled, content, figured I'd never leave. I also said in there that after 39 years as a bachelor, I was pretty sure I was never going to get married. And so my next book, because Population did way better than we expected, technically the next book was Off Main Street, which was a collection of my short pieces and essays that I'd been writing those previous 8 years. When you have a book like Population 485 that does better than anybody expected, including you and the publisher, they right away, of course, want what else you got? And I had 10 years worth of essays and magazine pieces. And so they went through and winnowed those down and published those as Off Main Street. But my next new from the ground up book was Truck. And it's funny because if you went back and read the pitch for that book, the pitch was a year in the life of my garden, which it is, and me trying to get my old pickup truck running. That was the pitch. What wasn't in that pitch was that 3-4 chapters into writing that book, I was married and met a woman. And we now have been married for, I think, 18 years. I got to check the math. She's not watching. She's not going to check me. She's heard all this plenty of times. But I like the idea of that you just don't know what's going to happen with a book. I didn't know how Population 45 was going to unfold. And I certainly didn't know that Truck was going to be a book about the bachelor getting married and then entertaining the idea that I might move somewhere else. And in fact, at this point, I'm living not in New Auburn. I'm living on a farm outside of Fall Creek, Wisconsin. And that was very simple. My wife and I were looking for a farm in New Auburn. And we just couldn't find exactly what we were looking for. And in the meantime, her mother had a farm down by Fall Creek and they had an opportunity that required them to move rather quickly. It was illegal and everything. It wasn't like the feds were chasing them, but they wanted to keep that in the family. And so we moved down there, but I'm still very much in touch with my folks in New Auburn. So I think what I'm going to do, again, because I don't want to spend all your time, me just rambling, I'm going to try something that I don't do very often, but we're going to try to share some photos with you that are related to Truck and related to Population 45. And I'm just going to look at the photos as they come up and kind of riff on them. And then we'll see where we're at when I get done with that. And again, I'll be very happy to take questions. So this is the part where I try to share my screen, and I think I know how to do it. Just push share screen. All right. So this is something when I speak to kids in school, I always start with this screen right here. This is my 3rd grade report card about my attitude. Mike continues to waste time and appears to be belligerent when asked to get to work. I love that. I always tell the kids, it's okay. There's still hope. You'll be okay. I like to show these next 2 photos because as much as I write about sense of place, and in this case, this picture was taken, I was really hung up with Population 45. I made it about, a quarter of the way into the book. I was just spinning my wheels and I'd also broken up with a girlfriend. I was feeling all sad and sorry for myself. And so I jumped into my car and I drove to Wyoming. And I went to the ranch where I used to work when I was a young man. And they let me sit in a room there and stare out the window that's Elk Mountain in Elk Mountain, Wyoming. I've climbed that mountain a few times, but what you see there is That is what I looked at every day when I was cutting hay or riding Roundup. And so I sat there in that little room staring at Elk Mountain and wrote about and made a huge breakthrough with population 482. It wasn't so much a breakthrough, it was kind of like, well, as I was referring to with Right On and Jared's offer up there in Door County, sometimes you just have to lock yourself away. And one of the things also that I like about going to a place that's not the place I'm writing about is that on the one hand, obviously there's no way to write a book like Population 485 if I don't grow up there, spend the time on the fire department. You know, that was not just me parachuting in for 2 weeks. That was actually my place. But it often helps to get away from the place you're writing about too, because it quite literally changes your perspective. It triggers different versions of different memories. You look out and you know, in the case of this view out this window, the contrast between what I was looking at and what I was trying to recall often triggered new ways of looking at the place I was writing about. The last thing I'd say, I'll try to move on here, is that that is not a real elk, that is a sculpture that was in front of the window. This picture here I threw in, it's not a very good picture, but the book Truck, the first several chapters of Truck were written in Door County, Wisconsin. And someone very kindly let me stay in their house on Washington Island for, I think it was a month or 5 weeks. And that was what I would look out every day. I would sit down at this window and look out at, I don't know, 40 million acres of ice. And this was the sun going down. And man, if you're looking at 40 million acres of ice and the sun goes down, it's a good means of looking within yourself, because there's nowhere else to look. And so that picture was taken while I was writing the opening chapters of Truck on Washington Island. This here, one of the things that I hope comes through in Truck is that it's a book about fixing a truck by a guy who can't fix his own truck. And one of the things I knew was that some of the people who would read it for the humor, some would read it for the love story, some would read it for the gardening, and other people would read it because they liked old trucks. And I knew that those people would really have a sharp eye on me. And so I wanted to make sure I got things right, even things I didn't understand. And so I went on eBay and I tracked down the original owner's manual for a 1951 L1 23-quarter-ton International Harvester pickup truck. And I just put this picture up because this is a schematic that showed the measurements of the frame and the cab and all that sort of stuff. And I just show you that sometimes writing is about getting into that perfect space, that perfect mind space, maybe drinking the perfect cup of coffee or whatever it is it takes you to get there, lighting your favorite scented candle. But sometimes writing is just about research and looking stuff up and seeing how long the frame your 1951 International was, because that lends you veracity. And veracity is a way of earning the reader's trust. They'll listen to what you have to say about love if they believe they can trust you on what you say about pickup trucks. This was taken in my brother-in-law's shop, my brother-in-law Mark. This was when we obviously had the truck torn down and I was using the grinder to get all the rust and old paint off of it. And we had the hood pulled and he was working on the front brakes. I was younger, a little slimmer. Who wasn't really? But what I love about this picture is I'll speak to young kids again sometimes, and often in rural Wisconsin, small schools, roughneck places like where I came from. And they have me come in and talk about being a writer. And I tell them, I love poetry, I love modern dance, I love things that are beautiful and delicate and thoughtful and introspective. But then I'll also tell them, this is writing too. This is art, because about 10 feet away from me on a workbench full of wrenches was a notebook, and it was all greasy. But it had all the notes that I was taking that eventually became the book Truck. This is fun for me, by the way. I can't see what picture is coming next, so I'm just reacting to them. I'm very, very scattered, and I think there's a couple more pictures where we'll get back to this, but I'm super scattered. I've always said I have functional ADD. I don't say that lightly. I have a daughter who actually is diagnosed and struggled with it mightily, and she's fighting her way through college right now. I'm terribly proud of her. I've never been diagnosed, but I'm very, very scattered, can't keep anything straight in my head, can't just look at a screen and see a book. I have to actually print it out, cut it out. And this is the book Truck. I rented an abandoned crafts shop just up the street from me in New Auburn. And what I do is I print things out and I tape it together, and what you see is chapters 1, 2, and 3 are pretty much coming together. And the reason I tape them together like that is so I could stand over them and I walk backwards and read them without stopping the flow. And then I just cut things up and lay it out on tables and move it around. And I'll show you a picture of that later. I think that's in here. But you can see things fall apart pretty quickly. And then behind me on the wall were all my ideas and notes and everything, so that I could literally walk around. Rather than try to find those things in my computer, I could walk around and look at them. I don't recommend that you work this way, but that's how I did it. One of the things that I really love about writing is that it's portable, and this is me writing about my truck while sitting in rural Panama. I have relatives who are Panamanian, my brother-in-law, mi cuñado, and my godson is Panamanian American. And so we would go down to visit them, and I dug that table out of the trash, out of a dumpster, and that was my desk. And the book I see there is Raymond Loewy. He's the very famous designer. He designed the Exxon logo. He designed silverware for Skylab. He designed silverware for the Concorde. That's what it was. And he also designed the International Harvester logo. And that's that book there. I was learning about Raymond Loewy. This is another favorite photo of mine. So this is the day I finished the book Truck, A Love Story. And this is the part of rural Panama where we were. And this was back in the days when we were just starting to transition into technology. And so a couple things about this picture. Way down in that little town, you can see the main street down in the valley. There was an internet cafe. Maybe some of you remember those. And you'd go in there and you'd rent the computer for an hour and you would get internet with it. And in the backpack that I'm wearing there is a little flash drive. And on that flash drive is the book Truck. And what I love about that photo is that is me walking down into a tiny little town in the middle of Panama in the mountains, where I'm going to send the manuscript of my book about Wisconsin to a New York City editor who was actually in London at the time. So we covered all the international bases on that one. And then, of course, my very favorite part of that photo is in the book Truck. I talk about meeting my wife, and the day I met her, there was a little 3-year-old girl at her side. And that little girl, that's the little girl beside me. That's my elder daughter, my given daughter. And she's now 22 years old and 6 feet tall. And this is just a picture too. Again, writing, it's a lot. It is the page, it is the words. I love tangling with the words. I love editing. I love tweaking syllables and trying to get everything beautiful. But part of the book Truck, also its experience. And again, that veracity. And I said at the beginning of that book, one of the things I want to do is take that truck to the woods and bring home a deer hunting with it. And there's a picture of me with that truck. And that's my brother-in-law, Mark, the guy who helped me fix the truck, is in the blue. And then one of my brothers there in the blaze, and I'm the guy with the cap on, the very classy ear flapper blaze orange hunting cap. Oh yeah, one of the things that's fun about doing Door County Reads or this city reads or that county reads is that you do events and people are so kind. And one of the very first community reads ever held for population 485 was in Lakeville, Minnesota. And when I pulled up to do the event, they had this fire truck parked out front with population 485 logo on it. That was very meaningful to me. I've said that the greatest privilege I've ever had is the 12 years I served beside my neighbors on the volunteer fire and rescue service, and that remains true to this day. I still make a few calls, just a handful. I think last year I made just over 10 or 15 calls. I'm nowhere near as involved as I used to be, but that is still the most meaningful thing I've ever done. Oh, so when Population 485 came out, I was approached by a documentary filmmaker, and he wanted to come to New Auburn and film us for a documentary. And I told him no, because I'd seen documentaries like this before. I was like, I don't want you coming here and doing a bunch of the silly, everybody's a hero and the snapping flames and all that, because one of my points with Population 485 is I told my editors, I said, I need for a rural firefighter or EMT to read this book and believe it. And I can talk about going into burning buildings, and I can talk about saving lives, but I have to also talk about all the things it's not, or the things that people don't see. And so I was really resistant. And then finally, the director called me himself, and he explained what he really wanted to do. And he also showed me a documentary that he had made about veterans. And so I came to trust him, and I said, okay. And so this was a documentary that was originally shown on the History Channel. And I just included this one because this is where they're interviewing my good old buddy, Bob, the One-Eyed Beagle. And if you've read Population 485, I don't need to explain who Bob, the One-Eyed Beagle is. And I love this picture because Bob's my neighbor. He's not a character in a book, he's my neighbor. This is after I see these are jumping between books, but I think you can handle it. So this is a picture of the truck after it was all fixed up, and it got cast in a movie. Now, it was a bit of an indie film. Neither the truck nor I got paid to be in it, but it's fun to see it, I think, looking pretty trim there and getting filmed. This is a photo of something I did write about in the book. So I wrote about my friend Ozzy, who was injured in a car wreck and is quadriplegic, but he's a gearhead to the max. And I would keep him updated on how the truck repairs were going. I used to take care of, I worked as Ozzy's nurse and at the time, and would take care of him in his home. Although I think I wrote in the book that I was nervous about, he needed a nurse to take care of him. And I said, man, I haven't worked as a nurse for a long time, but I guess I could do it. But I was really nervous that I wouldn't be up to the task. And then when I started working for Ozzy, I found out that his definition of a nurse was pretty loose, and I was going to be fine. But anyway, I always told Ozzy that we were going to take him for a ride, and we got that truck fixed. And so what you're seeing there is we got Ozzy into the back of the truck in his chair. That's my brother-in-law, Mark, who helped me fix the truck. And we chalked Ozzy's chair down and we strapped it in, and we went hammering down the road with the wind blowing through his beard. And he had a big old smile on his face. So I love this is a slide that I use for my writing classes. Actually, is it changing? Not sure what happened here now. It kind of locked up, it looks like, but I'll just keep talking and maybe something. There we go. There's just a little lag. Are you seeing it now? Okay. I use this when I give a little longer writing classes. It's not advancing now. Not sure what's happening, but I'll just keep talking. It looks like it's kind of coming and going here. It might be my internet connection. But this is an image that I use when I give writing classes or workshops, just to let people know how hard writing is for me. I think there's sometimes when people see a beautiful book that's got a beautiful cover and everything's been copy edited and everything's nice and smooth, they think that that's the way it works. And then I just sit there and poetry spills out of my keyboard. But this is a picture of one of the versions of Population 485, and you can just see it's little pieces, and I'm drawing arrows and I'm cutting things. And one of these says I/Hunt. That's something that didn't even wind up being in Population 485. It wound up being in Truck. And I'm going to try going back once and see if the image changes. I don't know if it'll catch up, but I do anything it takes. You saw those pictures where I had everything cut up, but also I number things. Yeah, there, I think the picture's back now with the numbers. I'm not sure what this lag is, but we'll just deal with it. You can see that I numbered these pieces and I'm moving them with arrows. There's one down here that even says where or add from 4A. I mean, these are just the different ways that you try to find your way through creating a book. And I also, you can see the deadly pigtail there where I've cut something. Even if I work hard on something, I'm pretty tough on it. If I don't like it, it goes. And then I also love my favorite thing in the world is revision and line editing. And I sneak in a little bit of that even on rough drafts like this. You can see the little word changes and stuff. All right, I'm going to try advancing. Hopefully it'll catch up. One of the things that I like to talk about too is that to take the mystery out of some of this stuff is these are 3 Post-it notes that appear in some form in Population 485. The blue one is just me It says sunny, the parade is forming up, hybrid car, boxes of candy from Farm and Fleet, horse trailers, show cars. I just was watching the local parade and knew that I'd want to recreate that. And I just started scribbling down everything I saw on this Post-it. And the yellow Post-it, I don't know if you can make it out on your screen, but it says tunnel of light and snow. And that was about I went to a very bad wreck. Someone had crashed, they had slid underneath a semi-trailer. They weren't decapitated, but they were severely injured. I happened to be the first medical person on scene, and so I had to run in and crawl through the wreckage and up into this person. But the firefighters had already set up big scene lights, and they were pointed at the wrecked car and the victim, and it was snowing very heavily that night, big fat flakes. And when I ran into the light, I all of a sudden had this vision where I was running into this tunnel of snowflake. And I just remembered thinking, wow, that's a powerful image. I want to recreate that. Obviously, I took care of the patient first, but that Post-it that you see is the minute we got back to the fire hall, I went to the chief's desk and grabbed that Post-it and wrote that little tunnel of light and snow. That's all I wrote down. I knew I could recall the scene, but I wanted that reminder. Sometimes when you write books about ambulances, you get asked to actually autograph ambulances. I've never been more nervous than when I was autographing that ambulance. They assured me they'd gotten approval. This is just a quick little shot of my buddy Bob the One-Eyed Beagle. Some people I get criticized sometimes. They say the way you talk about his eye and his appearance is very insensitive. And I'm like, dude, if only you knew him. And he knew, I went through everything I wrote with him before it got published. And then after the book came out, not only did he get One-Eyed Beagle put on his truck, but he got a tattoo with a cross-eyed dog that says One-Eyed Beagle. So you don't have to worry about his feelings. Just a couple of photographs. I'm going to move on so that I don't get too bogged down. But this is, I told you about cutting pieces of paper up and just moving them around, taping them together, doing whatever it takes. I call it playing a game of desperate literary solitaire, just to try and figure out my way through a book. This is another place. I wish this was my house. It's not, but this is a place where somebody let me work once. And those are chapters just laid out so I can walk around and look at them and make connections between different chapters and try to find, like this little table is full of things that I haven't found a place for yet. To figure that stuff out. Again, don't recommend working this way, but it's what works for me. This is just a picture that, this next one, which I think is not coming through yet, but yeah. So you know how Willie Nelson has that guitar that's got a hole in it that he's been playing forever? Well, this is the very first book that I ever held in my hand, the very first copy of Population 485 that I ever held in my hands. And I took it out on a book tour that I thought was going to last for 2 weeks, and it wound up lasting for 7 weeks and then 9 weeks. And then frankly, it lasted for 20 years. And I finally retired that book. I've got it framed up in my writing space now. This is my favorite possession. When I left New Auburn, they had at my last meeting, they voted and let me take my firefighting helmet with me. So I keep that right beside my writing desk. I got a call one day from one of the guys on the fire department. He worked at the village shop, and he said, "Could you come over? I need you to look at something." And I thought it had to do with the fire department, so I headed over. Well, what had happened is since Population 485 had come out, the new census had come out, and New Auburn's population went up to 562. And he said, "We're getting a new sign. I just wanted you to approve it." And they had this sign laid out, it had the cover of the book on it, but it had in huge capital letters in an arc. It said, "Welcome to New Auburn, home of author Michael Perry." And I just said, man, you can't do that. No, that's horrifying. But you can keep the cover of the book on because the cover represents the town and the town I love. So they took my name off and put the book cover on. And to this day, it's pretty faded the last time I was through there, but I still, again, you can win awards from the Pulitzer Committee or something or get a Nobel Peace Prize. And I've never done that, but they did put my book on the town sign and that feels pretty good. As does they made I think this was in Monroe for Cheese Days. They had a float out of my book and they hauled it down Main Street. And once again, I just say, put that in your pipe and smoke it, Pulitzer Committee. Having a float in the Cheese Days parade is a pretty big deal if you're an author from Wisconsin. Just a couple of people since we had to be virtual, someone said, well, we'd like to see where you work. And again, I know these photos are lagging, but I'm hoping they're going to catch up with you. So I've got a, okay, great. Sorry, folks. I thought I'd just keep scrolling. So I'll just quickly say this. Yeah, that's my desk. That's where I do a lot of writing. I record my little, I have a voicemail podcast that goes out once a week. And I also record 10 show radio, and I do voiceover work as well for certain projects. And I record my audiobooks right up there in my office. That's the original New Auburn Population 485 sign that they gave me, along with my fire helmet. Again, my two most prized possessions. I'd like to tell you that I got those antlers myself. I didn't. They're from my father-in-law. And then this here is when you're a middle-aged writer and you just sit and write all day, you got to do something to keep yourself from turning into a donut. So I have a treadmill desk, and I spend 2-3 hours a day writing on that, just walking while I write. And this is the most important part of the office. That's where I keep all the coffee. I start there in the morning. It's a mess, but I'm just showing you how it is. There's my fire department radio too. And then this is my green chair. Some of you have read in columns and stuff, or I think I even mentioned this in truck because I've had that chair forever. That's where I eat lunch and read books. And then when I eat lunch there, then I usually just fall asleep there too, take a little nap. All right, I think that's it. And I will switch back over to taking some questions. Are they those questions are in the chat, aren't they?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I have a few questions that have come in from the chat for you. Cheryl wants to know if the people on the coasts relate to the Midwest culture represented in your books.
Yeah, again, 16 answers come to mind at once. I'll try to get through a couple of them. The first thing is there's this, one of the really wonderful things is there are people from the Midwest all over on those coasts. The New York, when I got signed to HarperCollins and I went to New York and started having meetings, there was rarely a meeting that someone from Minnesota or Wisconsin wasn't there. A lot of young people would go out there and try to get jobs, and they just were farm kids who knew how to work. And so they're all, Tucson's another example. I do the Tucson Book Festival, one of the biggest book festivals in the US. And they have me read in this tent for 300 people, and it's overflowing. And I'm not a fool. I know that the reason there's 300 people coming to see me in Tucson is because Tucson is filled with people from the Midwest. So that's one answer. The other answer is how the characters, the people are everywhere. The Beagle's my favorite example. I was in deepest Mississippi doing a reading, and I was signing books afterwards, and people were coming through the line, and there's just kind of this pattern where someone will put their book down, I'll start signing it, and while I'm signing it, they're probably saying hi, and I'll make eye contact, and we'll try to connect for just that little moment. And as I'm opening this book and getting ready to sign it, these two big, calloused, workman-like hands plop down on either side of the book, and I can feel this person has leaned in real close to me. And I start to raise my gaze, and the first thing I see is the fire department insignia. So he's on the local fire department. Then I raise my eyes a little higher, and the gentleman is severely cross-eyed. And then, after I've taken that in, he says to me, "And I'm a butcher." Only he says it in this deep, deep Mississippi accent. And what I love about that is, like, there's the Beagle, Mississippi version. And I can go to Colorado, I was just in LA recently, and I can run into people who completely relate. Now, the humor sometimes, so I do a whole thing about cows and sneezing cows and why you shouldn't stand behind a sneezing cow. And people say, well, do they think that's funny on the coast? And I go, yeah, I've done that humor in San Francisco bookstores, and people laugh. It's just that here, some humor, you get the laugh of recognition. There you get the laugh of horror. Like, they just can't believe such things go on. So in general, yes, I think things have changed a lot too. We still get treated like flyover country, but for better or worse, the culture is also leveling off. In many cases better, but in other cases, part of what I loved about travel before was how different things could be from town to town, and now a lot of things have become the same. That said, and I'll try to wrap it up here, this is by no means a definitive answer, but it's long enough. One of my favorite things, I work with people from the coast a lot, especially New York City. Lately, a little more from LA. But the people in New York City that I work with, they're always very concerned about us provincials, you know, and our narrow view of the world. But every once in a while, they'll just say something that is so ignorant of our experience. And so one of the things that the quick example is I told them for the Montaigne book, they had to put a blaze orange cap on Montaigne, the French philosopher. And I sent them the actual number, the Pantone or cyan, whatever that number is for the actual color. And this award-winning New York City, Manhattan-based book designer sent me back the cover, and it was a lovely cover, but the orange wasn't even close. And I said in this conference call with all these New York people, the cover's great, but you've got to use that other color orange. This isn't even close. And he said to me, oh, we don't think people will notice the difference. I'll say, well, maybe you won't notice the difference, but you just made an astounding assumption there. And so what I like to say is, to wrap the question up, is that occasionally, the people from New York City have changed my life. They've been supportive and encouraging, and they're smart. But I do like, every once in a while, I like to remind them that sometimes out here in the Midwest, we think things up all by ourselves.
Great, thank you. Mary would like to know, in what ways has the town changed in the 20 years since Population 485 was published?
Well, it changed in that in 2004, 2007. Now I'm confusing myself. Yeah, 2007, I moved to this farm we're on now. So for the first time in my life, I've been away from New Auburn longer than I've been in it. But I'm up there a lot. Just very quickly, several things, some basics. My beloved old silver four-legged water tower was torn down and replaced with a modern cylindrical one. And that's fine. They've got a better system now. But I miss seeing the old water tower when I drive up. Things were pretty tough when I was there. And shortly after I left is when a lot of the sand mining happened. And I'm well aware of the controversy involved there, but New Auburn became an epicenter of sand mining. And it pitted neighbor against neighbor, as it always does. But a lot of the folks that I grew up with, I think of my friend Tony, I've known all his life, and he's got 6 kids, and he's a hard worker. And for the first time in his life, he had a really good paying job. And you know, that, no matter how I may feel about what they're doing, that helps temper my perspective on why people make the decisions they do. So the sand mining, it brought a lot of jobs, but it's like all mining, you know, it's like this. Never mind all the other issues. It just is a fact that mining goes like this. So lately, of course, it's tapered way back down. And they have a new fire hall, by the way. I forgot about that. But I think when I go, it's still a tough place to eke out a living, but it's still filled with good people too. And I spent some time up there at the school working on some projects with the kids up there, very informally. But we work with the kids in shop and the kids in English class and bring them down to the theater in Eau Claire so that they can see fabrication that goes into play production, so that I can show some of my roughneck buddies. I'm like, see you weld in theater. And you might accidentally see a play too. Be careful.
A couple questions came in about your truck. Jim wants to know if you still own it, and Cheryl wants to know, why didn't you paint it shiny red instead of flat green?
So I do still own the truck. It's sitting in my pole barn as we speak, and I can't get it started, and the rear axle froze up. So I still have it, but it's been a long. One of the things that happened is when we moved to this new farm, it's super hilly where we live now. And that old International, they just don't have a good emergency brake on them. And I couldn't hardly leave it anywhere without it rolling to the bottom of the hill. But yeah, at the moment, I still have it, but it doesn't run. As far as the color, it was, my brother-in-law suggested that we paint it flat marine green. And I liked that. I agreed with him for two reasons. Number one, if you ever met my brother-in-law, whatever he suggests, you usually just want to go along with that, especially if you're a writer with soft hands. And secondly, it was really cheap, green paint at Farm and Fleet. It was really cheap. And then thirdly, and I wrote about this in the book, I never wanted to restore that truck. I never wanted to be worried about running into a tree with it or scratching it. I certainly didn't want it. So I do love, on the paperback version, it's not the current paperback version because they've done a new edition, but the first paperback edition of Truck, the cover is an actual scan of an advertising postcard from the year my truck was put out, and it's got a red International on it that looks just like mine used to look when it came off the line.
Barbara would like to know if you know Nicholas Butler.
Yes, matter of fact, you know, I could call him if you want, but I think he's, yeah, Nick and I, we live very close to each other. We don't see each other often, which is often the case. I have a lot of friends who are musicians, and people are always saying, oh, have you seen so-and-so play? You're like, no, because you're always on the road. You're never in the same place. You might be neighbors where you live, but you don't actually perform. You're always off running around. It's a little bit like that with Nick. But we meet for coffee every once in a while. He's a tremendous talent. And he worked in the Oscar Mayer plant while he was trying to become a writer, which of course predisposes me to like him. But yeah, we live not too far. And we also have developed a funny habit. We never talked about it, but we realized that we both, independent of each other, tend to post pictures of ourselves driving our snowplow trucks.
That's great. Tiffany, who's a school librarian, wants to know if there are any plans for more juvenile books. She has some voracious readers.
This is the question that I dread. Thanks for asking it. The good news is you're not the only one. So I wrote a book called Scavengers, which is the only book I've ever written for young readers. And I made a mistake. I didn't realize it at the time because I wasn't familiar with the genre, but that was a 2-book contract. So before I even wrote the first book, I had agreed to write the sequel. What I didn't realize at the time was how voracious young readers are for sequels. And if I had it to do over again, I'd have written both books right away and then just spaced the release. But instead, we released Scavengers, and then I signed, the first one came out. In the meantime, I've gone on to I think, probably visiting Tom or Montaigne, I don't remember the order. And also, I'm doing a weekly newspaper column, a weekly radio show. I'm on the road 80 to 100 days a year. It's like back to the triage thing. You just work on what you can when you can. And I get more emails and texts and Facebook messages about when is that sequel coming? Because somewhere along the line, about 5 years ago, I actually said in public, it's about 70% done. It should be out next year. Never should have said that. It was true, the part about 70%, the part about next year, not so much. It's now about 84% done. And the reason I'm chuckling is every 6 months I get an email from my editor who should have just fired me a long time ago. But she's like, no, when you get it done, you'll get it done. I do have a long track record with them. That probably helped. Her biannual email just came into my inbox yesterday. So that question is perfectly timed. I promise I'm working really hard on it.
I think we are at time. Michael, I want to thank you so much for spending this hour with us. It's been wonderful hearing from you and seeing those photos. I want to thank you all for joining us. We are coming into the final week of the Door County Reads Festival, and it's a very full one. So I hope that you can join us at one or more of these programs coming up. Tomorrow, a Wisconsin trivia contest at 11 and a songwriting workshop at 3. On Monday, a play reading by Peninsula Players. Tuesday, a panel discussion with 5 Wisconsin writers representing the 5 regions of the state. On Wednesday, a program with Crossroads at Big Creek, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Thursday, a panel discussions with organizations around the state that support writers. On Friday, a play reading by Rogue Theater. Saturday, a panel discussion and a performance by the Griffin String Quartet. And finally, on Valentine's Day, you can share the love of reading and these books at our final book discussion. Thank you all so much for joining us. Stay well and stay warm. Michael, thank you so very much. It was a wonderful day.
Thank you. I'm looking at you all on a big green wall. And I didn't explain. Someone asked why I'm in town because my internet at home is even worse than this internet. So thank you all so much for coming in, and see you down the road.